This story follows Derek, the only human in a team of legendary elven warriors. He is a skilled cook, but also much more, a fighter with secret power in his iron skillet. When a surprise attack by goblins and dragons threatens the elves, Derek uses his unique skills and cooking tools to turn the battle around. What seems impossible happens, dragons flee from him. The story is emotional and dramatic, showing fear, surprise, and hope. It explores old fears between species and the possibility of new alliances. The stakes are high. If Derek fails, his team dies and the world remains locked in fear and war. If he succeeds, he may start a change no one expected. Derek stood by the small fire, flipping a thick griddle cake in his battered iron skillet. The dawn was just breaking over the Silverpine Ridge, casting soft light on the trees and hills around them. The morning air smelled fresh and cold. The others in his group were elves, 5 of them, tall and slender, with eyes that seemed to see everything. Derek was the only human, and that made him different. The elves did not hide their dislike for him. They thought he was odd, slow, and weak. They laughed quietly when they thought he could not hear. They called him the cook as if that was all he was good for. But Derek knew better. His skillet was old and strong. It had stories folded into the metal, stories that the elves did not understand. Movement on the ridge, Derek said, his voice low but steady. His eyes followed the soft dust rising over the trees. Goblins. The elves barely looked up. Phelan Starweaver, the only woman in the group, kept polishing her moonlade, a pale blue drink that gave her strange powers. Lysander the Luminous nodded, but he did not seem worried. The wind tells me nothing, Phelan said. The wind is upwind. There is no danger. Derek shook his head. The wind does not always speak truth. The goblins use smoke to trick the wind. They want us to see what they want, not what is real. Valyrian Dawnblade, their leader, finally looked at him. You think this is a trap? Not think, Derek said. No. They want us to move. They want us to leave the high ground. That's where they strike. The elves shared a look, a mixture of doubt and annoyance. They had fought many battles and lived for hundreds of years. What could a human cook know about warfare? Derek ignored their looks and focused on his task. He stirred a pot of moonlight-infused herbs next to the fire, adding a pinch of flash pepper. The spice made the air burn slightly, and Lysander's eyes watered from 30 feet away. You have until breakfast is ready, Derek said quietly. After that, the fight begins. Suddenly, the goblin war party appeared over the ridge. 40 small, ugly figures moved fast, their faces twisted with hate and fear. The elves drew their weapons and moved into formation, the famous Star of Elindra, a deadly pattern that made them nearly untouchable. Derek watched them closely. The elves moved like water, smooth and deadly. Their moonblades caught the morning light, sending glimmers across the field. Lysander's arrows flew true, striking goblins before they could react. But then Derek saw the trap unfold. The goblins were not charging straight. Instead, they split and disappeared, replaced by explosions in the ground. The earth erupted in fire and smoke, turning the battlefield into a maze of pits and acid pools. The perfect elven formation was useless against a war fought in fire and shadow. From above, dark shapes fell into view. Dragons. 2 young dragons, their red scales shining like blood, swooped down with terrible speed. The goblins and dragons had made a terrible alliance, a plan that no one expected. The elves fought bravely, but their centuries of training were no match for fire and acid and claws. Lysander was burned where he stood, his silver armor melted by dragon fire. The Ion Night Whisperer struck one dragon with a fierce parry, but acid caught his legs, and he fell screaming. Derek's heart pounded. The cook's emergency kit was not for fighting, but he grabbed what he could: salt, oil, and flour. The ground was soaked in oil from the dragon's fire, and Derek knew what he had to do. The smaller dragon swooped down again, fire building in its throat. Derek flicked oil into the flame. The fire grew suddenly, a fierce ball of flame that roared into the dragon's open mouth. The dragon screamed, metal against scale as Derek struck with his skillet, following the maps and lessons passed down from his grandfather. The dragon fell, stunned. The other dragon hesitated, eyes fixed on Derek. But Derek was ready. He threw a cloud of special flour mixed with magnesium powder. The explosion turned night into day, burning the dragon's scales and filling the air with smoke. The dragons screamed and fled. The goblins scattered in terror, dropping their weapons and supplies. The stories they whispered spread like wildfire. The iron cookers had returned. The humans who fought with kitchen tools were not to be feared, they were to be avoided at all costs. Valerian, barely alive, looked at Derek in disbelief. "You are not just a cook," he said. "You fought dragons and made them run. That is impossible." Derek smiled faintly, his hand steady as he tended to the wounded elf. "I am a combat cook. It says so on my business cards." The battle was over, but the war was just beginning. Derek gathered his pack and looked at the ruined field. Goblins ran screaming, dragons roared warnings, and the elves were left to pick up the pieces. His contract was clear. He was paid to cook and support. Combat was extra. But Derek knew he had changed everything. The stories would spread. The flame courts would hear. The dragons would remember. And Derek would be ready. The road to Cold Breath Tavern was long and quiet. Derek walked beside Mara, the goblin engineer who had approached him with a strange plan. She was young but tough, her face marked with scars that told stories of explosions and experiments gone wrong. Her eyes shone with a wild hope, a hope Derek had not seen in goblins for years. "Why are you doing this?" Derek asked as they moved through the dusty ember wilds. The land was scorched and cracked, a reminder of battles long past. Mara looked at him, her voice low. "My grandmother remembered. Before the burning, before humans and goblins fought and traded. When we dreamed of more than just surviving." Derek nodded slowly. "And you think these old books will help bring that back?" "No," she said. "But understanding why we stopped might help us start again." They made camp under the stars, the fire crackling softly between them. Derek unpacked his skillet, its iron surface warm from the day's travel. Mara spread out her strange devices, spice dispensers, pressure cookers, and machines that looked like they belonged in a war camp, not a kitchen. "This," she said, "is the automated battle kitchen. Boiling oil dispensers, spice launchers, dough catapults. Cooking turned to combat." Derek smiled. "Insane engineering. Dragons can't resist crazy inventions." Mara's grin was sharp. "While I distract Vorak, you sneak into his hoard and find the texts. We get what we need and get out alive." Derek looked at her, weighing the risk. "You want me to rob a dragon while you show off weaponized cooking?" "Yes," she said simply. "And yes, it's stupid. But it might be the only chance." 3 days later, they stood before Vorak's lair. The once grand fortress of Granite Falls was now a river of molten rock. Heat rolled over them like a wave, thick with sulfur and the scent of ancient fire. The entrance yawned before them, carved by dragon flames. Derek counted steps carefully. A good cook always knows the exits. Inside, the hoard was beyond imagining. Mountains of gold and jewels glittered under the flickering torchlight. But more impressive were the treasures of knowledge, books, scrolls, machines, and strange cooking tools lost to time. At the center, Vorak lounged, a young but massive dragon with scales deep red as blood. His golden eyes fixed on Derek and Mara with unsettling curiosity. "You're the cook from Razor Ridge," Vorak said, voice like rolling thunder. "The one who made the Blood Tusk War band flee." Derek kept his voice steady. "I'm a cook." Vorak laughed, a sound like avalanches breaking loose. It's been 400 years since anyone dared interrupt a dragon's breakfast. The dragon's tail flicked, cracking stone. But you did. And I want to know why. Vorak showed them an ancient collection of cooking tools. Did you know dragons once had human chefs? Before the burning. Before fear. Mara stepped forward. We want to make a new weapon. One that uses cooking to fight. Vorak's eyes narrowed. A cook who remembers the old ways. Interesting. Derek reached for an old mallet wrapped in dragon hide. This tenderizer was a weapon. A declaration of war. The dragon nodded slowly. My grandmother feared humans for their creativity. She was right. They began to prepare a meal unlike any before. Mara's machines used dragon fire with precision. Derek's hands moved with skill, blending spices and ingredients passed down through generations. The final dish smelled like hope, taste, and fear melted into one. Vorak tasted it. His eyes closed. For a moment, the lair was silent except for his breath. Then the dragon cried. Not tears of sorrow, but awe and wonder. Humans take what is and make it what could be, Derek said quietly. Vorak laughed again, louder this time. I give you the texts. The tools. Come back with others. Teach. Learn. Let us never be bored again. The world outside had not changed yet, but Derek felt it stirring. The old cycle of fear was breaking. And the revolution was just beginning. After leaving Vorak's lair, Derek and Mara felt the weight of what they had done. They carried ancient texts and strange tools, treasures that could change the world. Yet outside, the land looked the same. The flame court still ruled with cold power. Dragons still hoarded and burned. Goblins still lived by cunning and fear. But something new had begun. Derek returned to his kitchen fortress, a stronghold built where the old iron hold had burned. His skillet hung from his belt, worn but ready. Mara unpacked her strange machines and began tinkering, her fingers moving with the precision of a true engineer. Together, they opened the Culinary Academy for Strategic Meal Solutions. Students came from all races, humans, elves, goblins, and even young dragons. They came with knives, spoons, and hope. The lessons were clear, cooking was not just about food. It was about creation, strategy, and change. They learned how to make meals that told stories, that healed wounds, and that turned soldiers into legends. The Elven nobility laughed at first. They thought humans were servants, cooks without power. But then the human servants started quitting, leaving polite notes about better opportunities at the academy. The flame courts called emergency meetings. How could this be? How could cooking change politics and power? Valyrian Dawnblade sat quietly, thin and tired. His personal chef, a grandmother trained by Derek, had left for a goblin mining consortium that paid better. She was not just a cook anymore. She was a strategic asset. Meanwhile, in the dragon spires, the oldest dragons whispered in tall chambers. Scarathia the ancient demanded answers. He did what to the tenderloin? She roared, her voice shaking the halls. Vorak explained with calm pride how Derek had transformed cooking into combat, how flavors could surprise dragons, and how the human cook wielded the tenderizer like a weapon of legend. Scarathia sneered but took a bite of the final dish. She went silent, lost in wonder. How? She whispered. By remembering we were more than hoarders and burners, Vorak said. The dragons opened their halls to humans. The first dragon-human culinary embassy was born. Goblin engineers transformed kitchens everywhere. Their inventions powered by dragon flame and human creativity became unstoppable. Old powers did not fall. They were seasoned into something new, something stronger. Derek watched from his fortress as the world shifted. The tenderizer was no longer hidden. It was a symbol of hope and change. His students grew strong, not just in cooking but in courage and wisdom. Together, they made meals that fed more than hunger. They fed dreams. Mara smiled as she tested her self-stirring pot, making perfect risotto even in the heat of battle. "Think they'll write songs about us?" she asked. "Maybe," Derek said, sharpening a knife that had sliced its first dragon scale that morning. "But they'll get the details wrong. They always do." Outside, a dragon roared, not in anger, but as a dinner bell. The revolution had been cooked. The quiet after the revolution's first sparks was deceptive. The world did not suddenly change overnight. But beneath the surface, everything was moving. Derek's Culinary Academy became a beacon, a place where old divisions began to melt like butter in a hot pan. Humans, elves, goblins, even young dragons trained side by side. They learned to blend not just ingredients, but cultures and ideas. But not everyone welcomed the change. The flame court seethed with unease. The old ways, built on fear and control, felt threatened. Lady Moon Whisperer, a fierce elven noble, proposed banning humans from cooking. "Their influence grows too strong," she said. "We cannot allow them to teach our servants such dangerous skills." Valerian, once proud and confident, now sat quietly. He had lost weight and some of his old fire. His personal chef was gone, and he knew the truth: these new cooks were no longer just helpers. They were power. Meanwhile, the dragons debated in their vast spires. Scarathia the Ancient had tasted Derek's food. The old dragon was silent for days, her thoughts dark and deep. The new ways disturbed her. But Vorak, young and curious, argued for change. "We cannot live only by fire and hordes," Vorak said. "We must feed the future." Yet old fears ran deep. Some dragons whispered of the past wars, of the time humans nearly destroyed their kind. They remembered the taste of defeat, the tenderizer, the kitchen wars. They feared it would happen again. In the Ember Wilds, goblin clans scrambled to keep up. Mara's engineering spread fast. New devices appeared in hidden camps: spice guns, oil traps, dough launchers. Goblins who once scurried in shadows now stood taller, armed with inventions that shocked even the elves. The world was changing, but so were the risks. The Flame Court sent envoys to Derek, demanding loyalty, obedience, and silence. The dragons watched, some eager, others wary. Derek stood at the crossroads of history. He carried the weight of old promises, new hopes, and the simmering tension between races. One night, as the stars hung heavy, Derek and Mara sat by the fire. "What now?" Mara asked, her voice quiet. "We build," Derek said. "One meal, one lesson, one friend at a time. And if they refuse? Then we remind them," Derek smiled, "that cooking is combat. But combat doesn't always mean destruction." Above them, the wind carried distant dragon roars. Not war cries, but songs of a new age. The cycle of fear was breaking. It was slow and uneven, but real. And in that broken space, hope was cooking. The years that followed were not easy. The old world resisted with bitter claws, but the new world kept growing. Derek's Culinary Academy flourished, becoming a symbol of unity and change. Humans, elves, goblins, and dragons studied together, breaking ancient walls built by fear and hate. Dragons, once rulers of fire and destruction, began to see new possibilities. Vorak, the young dragon who had tasted Derek's cooking, became their greatest champion. He traveled far and wide, telling stories of meals that could change hearts and minds. In the Ember Wilds, Mara's inventions grew more advanced. Her pressure cookers and spice launchers became tools of peace and protection, used to defend villages without bloodshed. The Goblin clan started dreaming again, not just of survival, but of a future where they had a voice. The Flame Courts faced a choice: fight the change or shape it. Slowly, some Elven leaders began to accept the new ways, understanding that survival meant more than power. Valerian, once skeptical, became a teacher in Derek's academy, passing on wisdom and opening his heart to hope. But old fears still lurked. Some dragons, jealous of Vorak's influence, whispered of rebellion. Some goblins clung to old grudges. Some elves resisted the loss of control. Derek knew the fight was far from over. Change was a meal served slowly, sometimes bitter, sometimes sweet. It needed patience, courage, and above all, trust. One evening, as the sun set over the new iron hold, Derek stood beside Mara and Vorak. They watched students practice together, dragons learning to handle knives, goblins experimenting with spices, elves sharing stories from ancient tomes. "Do you think they'll write songs about us?" Mara asked, a spark in her eye. "Maybe," Derek said, smiling. "But they'll get the details wrong, as always." Vorak laughed, a sound like rolling thunder softened by warmth. "It doesn't matter. We made a new story. One of creation, not destruction." Derek lifted his skillet, its iron surface gleaming. The revolution wasn't fought with swords or fire. It was cooked, one impossible dish at a time. Around them, the stars shone bright. Above, a dragon roared, not in war, but in celebration. The cycle of fear was broken. In its place was something stronger, hope, forged by iron, fire, and friendship. And the world was ready to taste it.